Clemson used the portal appropriately over the last 2 years, they would be the ACC favorite. They're not because they failed to use the portal. They have misses on that roster they're still carrying.
So what is the argument for what Dabo's doing?
Dabo believes in the way that he's recruited and the culture that he's built at Clemson, a culture that has produced multiple national titles, multiple first-round draft picks, multiple ACC titles, multiple wins over the Florida State Seminoles. Why would he be scared of Florida State? When is the last time Florida State has beat Dabo Swinney and Clemson? 2014. Was Jameis Winston the quarterback then when that happened?
No, he was suspended for that game with Sean McGuire.
Yeah. So we're talking a decade ago was the last time they lost to Florida State. Coach Swinney believes in recruiting the 4 and 5 stars that he has on campus and developing them. That's what he believes in. They have went after a couple of guys in the portal, but he's really into that culture fit. And until you beat them, until Florida State can go in there and beat them, that's the only time you can say they closed the gap. Not almost, not it looks like what it looks like on paper. Clemson has dominated the ACC, and they're the champs of it until they ain't the champs no more.
I don't want to move the goalpost here, but they did lose to South Carolina. They did lose to Tennessee, and they got whipped by Notre Dame last year. Are we sure that Dabo isn't not doing all he can do by not using the portal? Like, you can't sit here and tell me, Carl, you watch these Clemson receivers and that Dabo thinks these guys are good. Dabo is not an idiot. I think he's just so hard fast to this culture thing that he's not improving that room.
So you don't think the guys that he went and offered scholarships to, and he has one of the most—
Some of those are busts now.
He has one of the most intensive recruiting processes of anybody in the country. You don't think he thinks those guys are good football players?
If he thinks all those receivers on his roster are good football players, then he's not as good of a coach as I thought he was.
Don't you just love those off-season debates? That's why we press record, so we can go back and look at them. Carl Reed and Bud Elliott here to rehash the Florida State Clemson debate as they get ready to play this upcoming weekend. Super excited about that. If you enjoy our content, a reminder to hit that like button and subscribe to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. Carl, a word that I heard a lot in that conversation was culture and Dabo Swinney's culture. We're a quarter of the way into the season. Obviously, opening the year with that loss to Duke was tough. It was their third loss in their last 4 games dating back to last season. So I'll ask you, what is going on and what is the current state of the culture at Clemson right now?
Well, we've talked about it ad nauseum here. Dabo Swinney believes in culture probably more than any coach in the country that's winning at a high level. He's been greatly criticized so far this season for not going to the transfer portal. But he has a system that he believes in, a system that has gotten him 2 national titles, a system that has gotten him 163-40 record in 15 seasons at Clemson. So it's hard for a guy to change who he is and what he is. And he still hasn't lost to Florida State yet, who has went completely the other way. And so if we're saying that his way doesn't work, I think you still have a full season before you can say that the way he's doing things isn't going to work out for him.
He has not lost to Florida State, but he has lost just 2 weeks ago to Duke. And Duke punked Clemson. They said, hey, your receivers, they don't scare us at all. Duke should not be able to play the coverages that they played against Clemson's receivers. That's disrespectful, and they got away with it because Clemson couldn't do anything about it. It's pretty obvious that Clemson, which for the longest time has done a tremendous job of scouting, recruiting, and developing receivers, has some misses on their roster. It was obvious to all of us out there. It was obvious last year when they got punked by South Carolina, right? But Dabo sat tight. He didn't do anything about it in the offseason, and now he's already sitting there with 1 ACC loss. And if they lose again, regardless of what happens against Florida State, they might not even make it back to the ACC title game. Dabo's method was tried and true and proven before the portal happened, but Clemson needed to look to another team in orange, the Baltimore Orioles. For a long time, they just used the draft. They didn't want to use the international free agency market, and they sucked. And you know what? They finally started blending both methods together. Drafting is still the most important. Recruiting is still the most important, but they went out, they got a couple key free agents. They used all of the possible resources. They didn't handicap themselves for no reason by refusing to use both opportunities for talent acquisition. And they're probably going to win and beat my Tampa Bay Rays for the American League East. Guys, I don't know how we can argue against using both methods of talent acquisition regardless of culture. What Duke did to them is kind of a blinding flash to the obvious for Clemson, in my opinion.
Bud, now I see what you did there. You see how you just tried to trick the listeners? You see how you just tried to trick them? You said Duke, and you went back to an era, you said it in a way that makes people feel like this is the same old Duke. But what you're not educating the viewers on is how much college football has changed. This isn't your regular Duke team. Mike Elko, 12-4 as a head coach so far at Duke. Mike Elko also was the key to Texas A&M being good. Since he's left Texas A&M has completely fell apart. Also was 10-3 in his
Mike
year
Elko
as
did
the
not force
defensive
him to hire
coordinator.
D.A. Durkin.
But listen to what I'm saying, dude. Bud, you are great at tricking the listeners. Mike Elko is the real deal, and arguably is going to be the hottest head coaching candidate in the country. So don't just say Duke and try to pass it through there like they got beat, by a bunch of sissies, okay? Duke is a really good football team this year. NFL talent on that roster, especially defensively. Now, let's get back to Clemson from a culture standpoint. We don't know how Dabo is going to go forward in terms of transfer portal in high school. He might be learning a lesson right now when he looks at his roster. It's really hard to get a guy to change the way he's done something when that way has been so successful. But when we talk about culture, let's also look at the recruiting rankings. Dabo Swinney won national titles in 2016 and 2018. If you look at the three classes before that, 2013, 15, 2014, 16, 2015, 9th, before 2016, 11th, 2017, 16th. So he wasn't recruiting at a top 3 class level even when they were winning national championships. He was recruiting specific kids in the culture, also aided by getting 2 generational quarterbacks. So from a standpoint of what he believes in, that way has worked. I do believe going into the offseason, he will make some adjustments in the way that he handles the transfer portal, but that's not going to help him this Saturday. Those guys won't be here until next season.
I think you're completely right. Like, Clemson hit on 2 generational quarterbacks. They hit on a bunch of really, really good defensive linemen. Their hit rate was incredibly good. And if we're being honest here, probably a little bit unsustainable over the long term as it comes to the quarterback position. You're not going to get a generational quarterback every 4 years. Like, for them to go to Boyd, to Watson, to Trevor was probably unsustainable for the entire tenure of Dabo's career. His error was that, like, over the last 3 years, while other teams still recruited well, everybody's going to have a certain number of busts on their roster. They would identify it. They would go out and make changes. They would say, okay, you know what? We did a great job recruiting almost all these spots. But, I mean, we really missed at O-tackle, or we missed at DB, or we missed at receiver. In Clemson's case, it was pretty clearly receiver. And 2 off seasons in a row, they didn't do a damn thing about it.
Yeah, I mean, if we pull up that graphic again of the recruiting class comparison, Carl, you're mentioning years and years in the past, but they're going in kind of opposite directions right now in terms of, the rankings for their recruiting. You see how great Florida State is doing this cycle versus Clemson down at 15th. It's getting worse while Florida State is definitely improving. And we can go back and forth till we're blue in the face on if it's the right philosophy. But Carl, is there a way for Clemson to make this current philosophy work? Or is it just being stubborn, as Bud is arguing?
It's not a way to work if you don't have the transfer portal aid in your recruiting process, because while you're reloading with freshmen, other teams are reloading with proven grown men. And we talk about guys that Florida State got, like Jared Verse, for example. We'll use him as the example. I think he's the poster child of what goes on a lot in the transfer portal. When you're picking up guys like them that are NFL caliber, that are older, and you're matching freshmen up against them, I think that does put you at a disadvantage. So that is something that Clemson is going to have to look to adjust to moving forward.
Yeah,
Completely agree. Yeah, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, you look at from the depth perspective as well. Clemson is now down a starting wide receiver. Cole Turner is going to be out for the season. And so you see teams like Georgia, who's obviously recruiting at a super high clip, but they're still, they'll still admit that they might need some other positions to come in. Wide receivers is one that comes to mind in the transfer portal. And so, I mean, Bud, just from your perspective, are we at the point where it's like, okay, Dabo Swinney's got to change to adjust for the current college football times, or do you think that there's a way for him to continue to use his philosophy of not using the transfer portal?
I don't think there's any way for Dabo to sustain anywhere close to the level of success he had if he completely ignores the transfer portal as he has been doing, right? I do think that championship teams still need to be built primarily through the high school level, because the majority of the best players in the country never hit the portal, right? Most of your best players are signed out of high school. You find out you hit on them pretty early. Your NIL guys, pay them pretty good to make sure they don't ever hit the transfer portal. You give them that early playing time. They keep developing. You got them for 3 years. They bounce off to the NFL. But every roster has holes. And for 3 years in a row, this is not a one-year thing. This has been around for 3 years now, and Dabo has just flat out refused to use the portal for 3 years in a row. Ohio State basically learned the lesson last year, right? They didn't take any DBs. They didn't want to upset the room. Ryan Day learned it. This year they took some DBs, and now that defense looks damn good. 3 years in a row, Clemson has decided not to do this, and I think that the results are snowballing on them, right? Everybody else is fixing their holes to some extent. Clemson's holes get bigger.
I don't think that it's just Clemson. I think that when you say the word culture, that's a word we've said a lot here today in this segment of the show. Culture is something that most programs have been built on. I don't think that culture matters as much anymore. I think the coach now who can manage his roster from year to year and get the most talented guys out there, because if you don't get guys on the field right away, they're going to leave because they aren't playing. Guys are interested in their NIL money. So you're not getting them to play for the guys on the front of the jersey anymore. Guys are playing a lot now for the guys on the back of the jersey. It's really an NFL model. You don't see one team in college football this year that's super dominant. And when you look at the top teams in the country that we have in the top 10, all of those teams look beatable. And you can have an upset on any Saturday.
All right, the portal is closed and the high school football season is in play, so no more changing rosters right now. Let's talk about the actual game at hand this weekend. Bud, I'll start with you. What's a storyline that maybe we're not talking enough about?
Well, last week, Boston College did a great job throwing on Florida State's defense. The Castellanos kid for BC, if you guys haven't seen him, he was somebody that Georgia and Florida State recruited at running back. And he's that level of athlete. And FSU really struggled to contain him. Cade Klubnik for Clemson is a pretty dynamic runner as well. So we're going to have to see how does Florida State play its scramble coverage against Clemson, because I do expect Florida State to get some pressure on Cade, who I think he's actually better than the numbers show so far. He's 14th in the ACC in QBR, which is surprising. I think he's a little bit better than that. How do they play him when he's on the move? Because last week they did not adapt their coverage to the moving quarterback really well at all. And they also they contain him in the pocket at times, but they didn't compress that pocket. So how will they adapt to a mobile quarterback? They did a decent job against Jaden Daniels in the opener against LSU, and a poor job this weekend in Boston. So that's a storyline I'm watching.
The storyline I'm watching, guys, is that last year when Clemson was struggling offensively, everybody blamed DJU, who's now at Oregon State, and the entire Clemson fan base was really pushing for Cade Klubnik to play. Dabo did last year stay loyal to DJU throughout the season. A change was made at the end, and now you have Cade Klubnik. Their offense has been stagnant and did not play well, like we said, against Duke at the beginning of the show. And so right now, in a game like this where you're going to go to Florida State as an underdog, when people feel like it's time for the conference to shift back to Florida State being the powerhouse team of the conference, can Cade Klubnik come out and have a big performance this weekend? Because it's going to take a special night from him for Clemson to have a chance to beat Florida State.
Yeah, big storyline in that Duke game was all the mistakes that were made on offense. Have to imagine they will walk into this game with hopefully some more confidence, and we'll clean it up a bit. But I got one more question for you guys. Carl, who wins the game?
I think Florida State has the best team in the nation right now. I think that they're the most talented team. I think they have solid quarterback play. And I think that the game that they had against Boston College was the wake-up call they needed, that they need to be ready to play every single week. I'm going to go with the Florida State Seminoles in this game.
Bud?
I did not think we would see a day where Carl is more confident in the Noles than I am. I am going to pick them to win the game. I don't think they're necessarily the best team yet. But if they play to their ceiling, I think they have the potential to really go in there and look good. So I'm going to take them.
Wow. All right. We started the segment with Carl saying Clemson hasn't lost to Florida State yet. And now he's saying it's about to happen. Would be the first time since 2014. Guys, thank you so much for the great conversation today. For all the Clemson and Florida State fans out there looking to get some more information about their squads, check out Noles 24/7 and Clemson 24/7.